Hey, I want to do a video. I've wanted to do a video for some time, but I wanted to do it about the passing of a friend of mine. He passed away suddenly on August 6th, and he was a writer. And yeah, just to talk a little bit about him, Bruce Ario. I first met him in '99, and then I knew him in person till about 2003, and then online for the remaining years. And he was very active on Facebook. So he also wrote for Auto Machination, a site that I also write for. And his death came on suddenly. He was 67, and apparently he fell and he hit his head on the bathtub. And the eerie thing is that he died on August 6th. I didn't find out or hear about it till about 10 days later. But he fell, and he had done a number of Facebook posts, probably not too long before he hit his head. And so it was just very shocking. But I'm gonna link to, the reason I'm doing this video is to link to some of the stuff about him. I wrote an essay recently, and Bruce had, he was known for, he had this poem form he did called started calling it the Ario, which is like 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, and 1 line. And he had a very kind of almost, I don't know if it's childlike, but he had just a very his poems were simple, but they weren't simplistic. So he had this ability at his best to craft his poems in such a way where the poesy is underneath, and using plain spoken words to do that is actually extremely difficult. And then he also has a novel called City Boy, which it is available online, but Bruce had the kind of personality where he didn't really want to offend anybody, and unfortunately he would listen to certain people who didn't know what they were talking about, and he would make changes to it to please people. And one of the things he did was he got it published by this small press, but City Boy is one word, and it's about him, well, basically himself, but a fictional version of himself, who you can see he's very dependent upon his surroundings. He is part of the city. The whole book is about him melding with the city. So the publisher then changed it to 2 words, and there's simply no reason for that. But Bruce just would do it. He doesn't want the confrontation. So that was one of the things that would kind of frustrate me about him, was like, you need to stand behind your work and not just let any dummy come along and just tell you, what you should do. I mean, you know your work the best. And then he later admitted he regretted doing that. So in time, it's a matter of now, having his work become more known, sharing it. And I mention in this review I write about him that something happens when any artist dies, is that people start to view you differently. And in many ways, Bruce was sort of like wearing a shirt with a Emily Dickinson quote, but he was a lot like Emily Dickinson in the sense that, I mean, he wasn't a recluse by any means. He was actually very social, but okay, not only just being eccentric, but he had a kind of really small view of things, and kind of the way Dickinson did. And a lot of Dickinson's poems, they're not very long. Like here, this says, "The daisy follows soft the sun, and when his golden walk is done," and it's little nuances, like in right here, if you can see this quote, is that, well, somebody who's a stickler for grammar would say, well, follows softly. You'd say, oh no, you're supposed to say follows softly, but no, it's the daisy follows soft the sun. And it's just little tweaks in the language that separates Dickinson from just whatever, standard kind of rhyming doggerel. And Bruce, in his novel, would have these like moments, these insights, where he would just say things off the top of his head, and he probably didn't even realize that he was being insightful. He was just saying it. And one of the lines is something, because it deals with his mental illness. He says, well, I didn't plan on getting mental illness. And it's kind of a funny thing to say, like, but that's totally Bruce. You'd be like, well, I don't know many who do. And he just had a very kind of interesting, nuanced way of seeing things. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that everything he wrote is good. Like, his Amazon page, for example, has a lot of just random books that he put up. I mean, even his poems, you're not going to be able to necessarily see that he was as skilled as he was at his best, because he wrote a lot of crap. And the interesting thing is, they used to say, first thought, best thought is kind of trite, that, people should revise their work and, try to make it better. But Bruce was actually somebody who I think, it's obvious that the first thought was probably the best thought for him, because in a lot of his best poems, I'm sure he probably didn't spend very much time writing them. It probably just literally shot out of him. Like, he has a line from one of his poems, I shot out of the passenger seat like a pit. And it's like, that's so Bruce. It's like a pit. These poems just came out of him. And if he tries to overthink it, that's when the problems would happen. And I also don't think he would have been particularly good if you say to Bruce, hey Bruce, can you write a poem or an essay on this topic? If he had to think about it, it's probably going to come off strained and cliched, because the words would just have to come to him. And I've often said, like, it can happen once you kind of get your vision. I mean, I've had this happen too, where I've said that sometimes, like, if I'm in that zone and I get these ideas, and I've said it's like taking dictation, and that's kind of where the idea of the muse comes in. It's like, is this me? Is this, the voice of God? Whatever. A muse, they'd say, well, where does this come? Well, really, it's years of, sorry, I'm hot, so I'm scratching my face. Really, that's just years of homing your skill and refinement and practice. And after a while, once you start to get that, vision, you just know how to apply it. It doesn't mean you're successful every time. Bruce wasn't, but when he was, he was. So, hearing that he passed away, it was very sad. I was very sad, because he never stopped, wanting to learn. He and even writing for Auto Machination, he would read our essays, he'd read my essays, and he'd leave sometimes just one-line comment, but he'd show that he at least read it. I mean, he really enjoyed learning, and he, in this little video of him that they interviewed him for his church, he has a moment of kind of little bit of ego where he says, I write good stuff. I don't write bad stuff. I write good stuff. And that's sort of like Bruce, just, you need more of that, And, but having said that, not everything Bruce wrote was good. I mean, most of it wasn't, but when he did write well, he did. And the reason I say that is because it's important to discern when a writer has hit a home run and really has nailed something, or when that writer is kind of floundering. And this goes back to, I've always said, it doesn't matter who writes something or who creates something. It doesn't matter, because what matters is the work. And in case of writing, it's what's on the page. And it's like, you don't look at a Shakespeare poem or line and say, oh, well, this is great because Shakespeare wrote it. Well, no, you have to be able to discern and say, is this, Shakespeare, not everything Shakespeare wrote was great. And he wrote a lot of junk too, because every writer does. It's just, once you learn over time, you learn to minimize that. And even in my own work, my early stuff from high school is junk. And it's almost funny, because I remember when I'd write it, and I knew at the time it was kind of junk, but I just felt like I had to write it out. I just kind of wanted to just, all right, I write this junky thing or whatever. But I'm not sitting here trying to like push that. I'm just kind of like, ugh, you don't want to look at that. But so, Bruce was just very empathetic. He was very kind. He loved more than anything Bob Dylan and Jesus Christ. I've never known anyone who loves Bob Dylan more than Bruce. And, I enjoy the best of Dylan's songs, but not that much. And I had the opportunity to view his a memorial service for him, where they had somebody sing Blowin' in the Wind, and it was very touching, because Bruce would have loved that. And it's just, I guess he never got to meet his idol, but it's like when you're an artist or a writer of any quality, you have an advantage in the sense that you have something that can allow you to live on. And Emily Dickinson is the words now. And yes, this is a t-shirt I got on Etsy, and you could say it's commercialized, but if it weren't, had she not lived, I'd be wearing something else. But the writers, all artists, they ultimately live on in their work, and that's what will happen for Bruce. And I'm planning to reread City Boy and write a review. I've been doing my own reviewing and reading this bio on Bach, which is really good, and I'd like to review that. It's just things happen in life, and then your plans kind of get derailed. So so that's where I stand with that. So I'm gonna have some links below. Encourage you to go and visit them, and learn more about Bruce, and see some of his writing. And in time, the hope is that there'll be some more, a more refined kind of version of his work available online. I've always imagined like a selected Bruce Ario would include the best of his Ario poems and City Boy. And I could just see that being, a good sized collection. But Bruce wasn't a writer. He wasn't, he wasn't Wallace Stevens. He wasn't Hart Crane with the vocabulary and the grandiose kind of language. He wasn't Stevens in terms of the deep philosophical ideas. He wasn't Rilke in that same sense of this. But he was, at his best, I think Bruce is a great, second tier poet. And I don't say this to, put anybody, but I'm just ranking him in terms of his value as where he falls. And, I would put someone like Hazel Hall there, Dylan Thomas, Bruce, someone like Stevie Smith. He reminded me of Stevie Smith. And even Dickinson to a great degree, even though Dickinson has a very huge name. she still has kind of this vision that's focused on the small, and the thing about Dickinson is she has, she only kind of wrote in one form, and while Bruce did have some free verse non-Ario poems, he's sort of the same way. So I mean, you know, Truman Capote I would put. I mean, he's a novelist, but you know, but you know, it's just where I rank him. That's all. And I mean, very few people can even, ever make any impact with the art if politics isn't. Politics doesn't do it. Just because you have the right politics. The right politics. What's the right politics? I guess it varies depending on who's watching or who's reading. That's not what art is about. Art is communication at the highest level. It's not about just shoving ideologies down your throat and telling you what to think of in this preachy, condescending manner. And unfortunately, it just feels like there's a lot of people who just seem to think they cannot separate the two. And so it's interesting. Bruce is definitely, I can say he was one of a kind. As cliche as that sound, I've never known anyone like him. And he was a Christian, but yet he was extremely liberal. I mean, he supported abortion. He, he was a, strict Democrat. I mean, it's very, very interesting. And so it's like, I think he believed that if you live like Christ, that's how Christ would be, non-judgmental. And Bruce was the most non-judgmental person I think I've ever known. Truly empathetic, kind, always putting others first. So, anyway, I'm going to put those links, so I encourage you to visit them. I will have more videos. I got some Enneagram ideas. I'd like to talk more about writing, but I just wanted to share this about Bruce Ario, 1955 to 2022, 67 years old, lived his entire life in Minneapolis, a true city boy. Thank you.